Okay. Thank you everyone for coming, for being interested. Checking, Jerry, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Excellent. Um, okay. So we're scheduled for 1 to 3:15. I'll say up front that I plan to break for 5 minutes at 2:05. So everybody can be human being throughout the shiur. So we'll plan a 5-minute break then. A word about what we're trying to do in this shiur. It's framed as halakhic perspectives, not a halakhic perspective. So I am not planning to give a singular halakhic perspective or de paskin. Despite that, I have to say that this is as scared as I've ever been for giving a shiur. I would say a special version of the Tfilas Rabbi Ben Hakana when you're dealing with life and death issues, and life and death issues which I don't have any personal competence in dealing with. I think that issues have to be addressed, but I'm aware of my own limitations in terms of my knowledge of the real world on this, and so that has to be framed. And I don't have a final conclusion. I think a third issue that has to be addressed at the very start is that there's a possibility that halakha, either in practice or even in theory, is not the right way to address this issue. I mean by in theory is maybe we don't have halakha on about war or about certain kinds of issues, and I mean practically is that maybe even if we should have halakha about it, we don't have it yet. All of those have to be addressed, and so part of the purpose of the shiur is to see how useful halakha is as a model for addressing these issues. Okay, I think there probably is. There is. I think I do have the capacity to recognize raised hands. So if you have that capacity, that would be a great way. Putting things in the chat is also a fine way to make comments. I will try to read the chat on occasion. If not, Dov, can I empower you to read the chat and tell me if I need to stop because it's a really good shiur? Dov Weinstein? It's a really good question.
I don't know if I can call the difference between a good and a bad question, but I can
I'll
certainly
trust you.
watch the chat.
Gotta trust somebody.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
It doesn't seem to be a chat.
So that'll be so Dov can call attention to a question if I haven't noticed it, or you can raise your hand, or you can just put it in the chat and see how other people react. Okay, so with that, I'm going to share my screen to the source sheet, but you're welcome to just open your own screens to the source sheet and do it that way if you prefer, because I'm not sure how long I'll stay in the screen sharing mode. I'm going to start with a quote from an interview with Aaron Lichtenstein. This was central to a debate, I guess, I had with Rabbi Michael Broyd in one of the early issues of the Edah Journal, which was a fundamental question about whether any sorts of religious rules can apply to law. And Rabbi Broyd, in that version, there are many versions of Rabbi Broyd's article on war, and so I'm not going to ascribe any particular position to him. You can read the various iterations of his articles. But in that article, he seemed to be arguing that there are no religious rules in war, and really had nothing to say about war other than win. And I responded, but with a lead quote from Lichtenstein Zechron Livracha, where he said, "Ulam chashuv biyoter shadam hayotzei lemilchama yodea she'ein hu over me'olam ba'al sulam al arakim echad le'olam ba'al sulam arakim shoneh." That's a typo on my part. That should be sulam. Okay. Right. So it's most important that the person going out to war understand that he or she is not passing from a world possessed of one ladder, one hierarchy of values, to a world with a different hierarchy of values. And so that's the presumption I am working under. that the world is not different. There isn't a space which is unethical, but that doesn't tell you how you derive the rules, right? You may derive the rules from one place to another. The hierarchy of values may be expressed differently. Let's say, for example, when we quote all sorts of Gemaras which say that even in time of war, peace is the supreme value. Okay, but how do you express the supreme value? You might express it by trying to win the war really quickly. You might, right? There are all sorts of ways in which a hierarchy of values can be expressed very differently in different circumstances. So all I want to get out of the Lichtenstein quote is that somehow we have to feel a continuity between the world we live in peacetime and the world we live in wartime. So where do we get those values from? So one key source which raises all the issues is in Bereshis, where we have all the rules against killing, and yet also the rule that killing has to have a consequence, right? So we have here, right? So v'achatimchem nafshetechem edrosh miyad klachia edroshenu umiyad ha'adam miyad ish achiv edrosh et nefesh ha'adam, right? Right. So the taking of the bloodshedding human blood is a crime which requires human response. Shafech dam adam badam demo shafech. We don't need now, but we will in the course of the shiur. We'll address some aspects of the redundancy here, whether this is supposed to be taken halachically or not, and for whom. Right. So I'm working in a universe where the human being, a moral universe, where the human being is created b'tzelem Elokim, and the universe and the human being being created b'tzelem Elokim means taking human life is a crime, and that leaving the taking of human life unaddressed is also at least a wrong. We have to figure out a way to square that. That's one element of the moral universe. Another, with apologies to those of you who've heard me say this many, many times, I think that one of the maybe the central ethical moment in rabbinic Judaism is Gemara in Sanhedrin, where which in several other places, where we ask why it is that certain sins but not others you're required to die before violating. The three sins that Rabbi Yochanan consistently says are in this category are avodah zarah, gilui arayot, and shfichut damim. And the Gemara asks what the source is for avodah zarah, and the answer is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha. In that same pasuk has a somewhat possibly different drasha by Rabbi Akiva in Brachot. The Meiri says that here we're really quoting this drasha Rabbi Akiva, afilu notel et nafshecha. That's what Rashi quotes on Chumash, and so it's very famous. Not clear whether Rashi and Rabbi Eliezer are saying different things, but everyone agrees that the principle that you have to give up your life rather than commit avodah zarah is derived from a verse. And then the Gemara says, okay, what about Gilui Arayot and Shfichut Damim? So it derives it from a Breita from Rabbi. Rabbi derives it from a verse in turn, which draws an analogy and says that the case of adulterous rape is parallel to the case of murder. And we're supposed to learn something apparently about the nature of adulterous rape from the comparison to murder. So the Breita is very confusing to read, but for our purposes, what matters is that the Gemara says, okay, so we end up deriving the rule that you have to give up your life rather than commit adultery from the rule that you have to give up your life rather than commit murder. Okay, and the Gemara says, how do I know that you have to give up your life rather than commit bloodshedding or murder? And the Gemara answers, and I always think this is really maybe the most important line of rabbinic literature. Yeah, the answer is that it's a svara. Right? There's no verse whatsoever to teach you that you have to give up your life rather than commit somebody else. You just have to know that already. And you have to know that before you come to Torah, because otherwise you can't understand why the Torah is comparing murder and adultery. And the Gemara frames the svara in a very balabatish way. Right? There was a man who came before Rabbi and said to him, "I was told by the Lord of my realm, right? Kill somebody else, or I'll kill you." Am I allowed? Implicit question: am I allowed to do it? And Rabbi tells him, "You're not allowed to do it." Mi Yemar or my Chazit, depending which version of the Gemara you have, the Damani Dach Sumuktve, Dilma Damu Dahu Gavra Sumuktve. Who says your blood is redder than his? So somehow, right? So that's like that's the pre-Torah ethical moment that all human blood is equal, and so you can't take someone else's blood to save your own. On the other hand, we have a Gemara in Bava Metzia in which we pass on Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says, your life comes first. So the power is that the Svara was said, knowing this drasha, because the Svara is, as we have it framed, is later than the drasha of Rabbi Akiva, and yet somehow that has to be true. We have the law of Rodef, which seems like right that you can kill somebody who is trying to kill somebody else, even though right, and that seems like an implementation of the pasuk shofech dam adam in a sense. Right, we have all the rules of death penalty, and we move from the law of Rodef to the law of Baba Machteret, and Baba Machteret, which the Gemara seems to interpret it in Rava's version as allowing anticipatory self-defense, even when somebody is not currently trying to kill you, but there is a strong likelihood, a chazaka, however you want to frame it, that they will kill you, then you're allowed to kill them first. And even in some complicated versions, even if the reason they're going to kill you is because you're going to escalate by resisting their attempt at theft. So that also has to play in. And finally, we have, right, all these have been purely personal. We have, I quoted from Yalkut Shimoni, but it's in a variety of midrashim. And about the law, the Midianite war, it's words Midianim, Lama Kitzarim Heim Lachem, Mikanam Ruchachamim, Im Bal Hargacha Hashkeim Lahargo. Okay, so there's right. That's our moral background, right? If Lichtenstein says we have to be living in the same universe, so here's the moral universe: human beings are created b'tzelem Elokim. That makes killing a human being or shedding the blood of a human being an enormous crime, but also creates an obligation of justice. In addition to there being an obligation of justice, there also is a circumstance in which you are allowed to prefer your life. That's Rabbi Akiva. Where it seems some version of where you're not actually killing the other person. You can, right, not only are you allowed to exact justice for past bloodshed, but you can even shed blood to prevent future bloodshed. You can even do that on to some extent on a statistical likelihood or a statistical inevitability of the other person attacking. All that is personal, and one medrash that might move this from the personal to the communal level. Okay, that's moral background, and so throughout the discussion, we're gonna have to try to figure out how we play all those things out. To what extent these are these play out in the law. Okay. So let's start with probably the most extreme statement about the legitimacy of civilian casualties in war from my teacher, Rabbi J. David Bleich, a famous article on nuclear war. This is the Contemporary Halakhic Problems, Volume 2, page 9. I assume it was originally published in tradition. He says the following: the Gemara Shavuos Daf Lamed Beis declares that a sovereign power which slays 1/6 of the population of the universe, I assume this means the human population of the universe or the sentient population of the universe, or the population of the sentient species of the universe, however you want to frame it, is not culpable. It is to be inferred that the death of 1/6 of the inhabitants of the universe entails no culpability, but slaying more than 1/6 of the population of the universe does engender culpability. Okay, right. So that sounds like I guess we could imagine a case in which the entire universe, or 5/6 of the universe, was attacking you. And in some way, we could frame it as self-defense, but it sounds more like, in the context of war, that we allow a lot of collateral damage. Tosfot says further, so Rabbi, that understanding the dictum is referring to the monarch of a Jewish state indicates the Gemara here imposes a constraint on Milchemet Reshut. Right, you can't initiate a Milchemet Reshut if you anticipate that an inordinate number of people, I guess we're about, I don't know, somewhere in the billions now, will perish as a result of hostilities. According to Tosfot's analysis, however, a similar restriction does not apply to wars which are mandated by Scripture. Right, so Rabbi holds that in a Milchemet Reshut there is a limit on the collateral damage that you can cause, but in a Milchemet Mitzvah there's no limit whatsoever. Right, his reference. He then footnotes a Chatam Sofer. Chatam Sofer says that not only is annihilation of 1/6 of the population of the universe forbidden, but also that war leading to genocide, defined as the extermination of 1/6 of a particular nation, is similarly prohibited. So this is much more machmer, right? Only 1/6 of a particular nation, and that's going to be useful as we go on in a particular way. Okay, so that's, I mean, again, you could try to claim that it's only that he's talking about a case where the entire other side, the entire population is combatant, but that's really, really hard to say. If we were to take this as a given, that would be a very hard, that would be in many ways an exclusion of halacha and of Jewish ethics from the realm of Milchemet Reshut, for sure, and certainly Milchemet Mitzvah, which has no restrictions. Okay, so the Chazon Ish says something that sounds along the same lines. It says V'yesh la'ayin b'had amar shluas lamed hey beis malchus dekad lechad nishita be'alma lo me'ansha. And Tosfos there explain Milchemet Reshus, and the Chazon Ish wants to know, why do we limit it to that? If the other side is not keeping the Sheva Mitzvot, and they haven't done tshuva for that, why should you be punished if you kill more of them? Why can't you kill the whole world if it turns out that the whole world doesn't keep the Sheva Mitzvot? Okay, so a couple of problems show up here in the Chazon Ish, which are interesting. The first thing the Chazon Ish is that the Chazon Ish conflates the private realm of criminal justice with the public realm of war. Right? Why can't you kill more people in war because that is punishing them for not keeping the Sheva Mitzvot? Secondly, he raises for the first time a problem that will bedevil us throughout the Shiur, which is, do we think that all the rules of war have to be reversible? And particularly that all the rules for Jews conducting war with non-Jews, and leaving aside the question of civil war, astonishingly, I have not yet seen a discussion of civil war of Jewish civil war in Halakha, despite the record of the Beit Rishon and the internal dissensions of Beit Sheni. But no one seems to address that well enough. That comes up to some extent in discussions of Jews who are drafted into the Tsar's army and things like that. But those are all part of Jews participating in other wars, not civil wars. Okay, believing the Chazon Ish here, when he frames it as the Sheva Mitzvot, I think a presumption here is that, of course, that Jews can judge non-Jews for not keeping the Torah mitzvot, but non-Jews are not allowed to judge Jews for not keeping the Torah, because that, of course, requires Beit Din. So one of the things that we have to think about is whether a fundamental given of any useful Halakhic ethic of war, and there are two ways. One is any useful in case we can articulate it without immediately removing ourselves in the eyes of the rest of the world from conversation, and B, whether we think ourselves that it ever functions ethically. If there's ever if you ever say something, well, Jews can do this, but if the situations are reversed, then Gentiles can't do the same thing to you. All right, so some sort of raises both these issues, but nonetheless, he reads the Gemara like Rabbi that in Milchemet Reshut a Jewish king can kill at least 5/6. Okay, now if you look at the Chassam Sofer, though, Chassam Sofer does not have the problem of reversibility, because the Chassam Sofer actually frames this as about Jews. Right. The question is, his question is, why is Nebuchadnezzar punished for destroying the Jews, if really Jews are less than 1/6 of the world population? And Nebuchadnezzar is framed in his world, right? We have to deal with the historical accuracy. And Nebuchadnezzar is framed as somebody who conquers the entire globe. And so within his, right, so even if you take the framing that a king is only allowed to kill 1/6 of the population under their control, so Jews are less than 1/6. So in order to solve that, right, so that's where the Chassam Sofer comes up with the notion, no, it's 1/6 of any given national entity, and therefore Nebuchadnezzar was not allowed to kill more than 1/6 of the Jews, with a proviso that that's only true if the Jews keep the Torah, right? Or at least keep some notion, right? The drasha uses, right, from Rashi is, Im atem muvdalim min ha'amim atem sheli, v'im lav atem shel Nebuchadnezzar v'abadav. of a Chaverav, right? So the Chassam Sofer really is willing to deal with the consequences of reversibility. And he puts in a new limit, 1/6 of the population of a given nation, however one defines a nation, which is also going to be a problem going forward. Okay, so that seems like that's our contribution to the conversation. Is we have a prohibition against genocide, at least in Milchemet Reshut. However, I think all this is just wrong, which is a scary thing to say. But the Gemara, this is the Gemara in Shavuos, right? The Gemara in Shavuos is talking about the meaning of the term Shlomo in Shir HaShirim. And it says, right, so it's right, we have the Pasuk, Karmi Shali Lefanai, Elef Lecha Shlomo, so Shlomo gets 1,000. L'masayim l'notrim et priyo, right, and 200 go to the people who are guarding the orchards. So the question is that 1,000 for God and 200, right, and 200 for the rabbis? That's right. That's if it's kodesh, or is it chol, which means that we'll have to figure out we'll have to figure out what it means if it's chol. It's in that context that the Gemara says, "Hang on a sec," but Shmuel said that a malchut diktala chad neshita v'alma that kills more than 1/6 of the alma, lo me'ansha isn't punished. Shenemar up to 1/6. Right? Shenemar karmi shulu lefanai elef l'cha shlomo l'malchusa derakia. So 1,000 of the 1,200 belong to God. Let's say that means that only God can kill them. But the kingdom of this world gets the 200 can decide what to do with them as they will. Okay, and that's the language of the Gemara. Now Rashi says on that, Dekat lechad mishita kilamar be'angaria d'avodat hamelech. It's talking about the king can kill 1/6, meaning the king can take up to 1/6 of the population for hard labor. Okay, Tosfot says no, it's Tosal Milchemet Reshut Ka'amar, and that's where the confusion comes in. But it's pretty clear to me that what Tosfot means, and I think pretty much everybody until the Chazon Ish understood it this way, and I think if we look back, we'll see the Chassam Sofer understood it this way also. It's that a king cannot start El Milchemet Reshut in the belief that if the king is aware in advance that there's a likelihood that more than 1/6 of the population will die. It has nothing to do with killing the other side. It has to do with what sort of casualties you can endure on your side. So you can look at the Rimigash also, but my impression is that all Rishonim and all Achronim up to at least the late 19th century, we'll see in a minute, held clearly that Gemara was talking about casualties on your own side and had nothing to do with the amount of casualties you can cause on the other side. So I think we lose the Chassam Sofer's prohibition against genocide, sadly, but we also don't have to deal with the presumption that we are okay with enormous collateral damage that doesn't raise issues. Okay, that's part one. Part two, however, is that when people look for a claim that there simply are no rules in war, so the way to say that is to say that look, there's a prohibition against murder. War doesn't have a prohibition against murder, so war obviously is just a completely different zone. It's a space where all the values that are that play out within society don't play out when there is no society at all. And the usual source quoted for this is the Netziv. So I want to take us through a series of Netzivs and see if we think that's what he says. And the Netziv is grounded to some extent in the Gemara we just saw. So we also have to check whether the Netziv provides a precedent for the reading that the Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Bleich took, in which Shisa Me'alma refers to the other side and not to our own side. Samek Davar says, Miyad Ish Achiv, right? That's back in our pasuk in Bereshis. Piresh HaKodesh Baruch Hu, Ematay Adam Ne'enash, when is a person punished? V'sha'ah she'ra'ui linhog be'achva. So a person is only punished for bloodshedding at a time when the other person is your brother. Masha ein kein b'shas milchama ve'et lisno, az et l'harog. Ve'ein onesh al ze klal, ki kach nosad ha'olam. Right? There's no punishment for that at all because that's just how the universe was set up. Look at Isa b'shuas l'chlamahei, he quotes our Gemara. And now he says, "Afilu melech Yisrael mutar lasot milchemet harashut." And we know this because even a Jewish king can engage in milchemet harashut. The aflagav shekama mi Yisrael yehergu al yedezeh. Even though the king is considered to be, in a sense, killing a whole bunch of his own people. So he doesn't read the Gemara that way. But he reads the Gemara as talking about the king killing his own people. On the other hand, he seems to think that if the king can go out to war, which involves deliberately putting the king's own people at risk, then therefore those people can also kill other people. It's not clear how the logic follows, but that's clear again. And he sends you to Devarim Chaf Chet, and there he tells you that ordinarily it should be forbidden for at least for a Jew, let's say, right, to participate in war, because participating in a war would be is a version of suicide. And he says, no, just like the king is entitled to launch a Milchemet Reshut, so too you can volunteer. And he quotes the same Gemara. In the Halakhic Davar on Breshit Perek Tet Pasuk Hey, he says something which is much scarier in a sense. And this is where Natan comes to David. Natan HaNavi comes to David and says, you're not going to be punished for the death of Uriah, because the pasuk which uses the phrase that you killed Uriah b'cherev bnei Amon. The Gemara understands this as an analogy. Ma cherev bnei Amon iye taneh nashalav kach Uriah hachiti iye taneh neshalav. So what's the comparison? So his answer is that he's here. Aval kashur Uriah lo haya bemet mored b'malchut, ela sheDavid hamelech danahu l'mored b'malchut. Uriah was not actually, right, Uriah refuses to go home and sleep with Bathsheba. He is not actually rebelling against the king. But just like David is not punished for what he does to Bnei Ammon, so too he's not punished for killing Uriah Chiti. Aval kashu Uriah lo haya bemet mored b'malchut. Uriah was not actually a mored b'malchut. But David judged him that way, and that's okay, just like killing with Cherev Bnei Ammon. And in Gemara and Kedushin, right, he's even clearer about that. He says, right, Vanira, really Uriah was not Mored B'Malchut, Chas v'Shalom. Tosfos have all sorts of stretches to make Uriah Mored B'Malchut, but really he wasn't. And right, but since David tried to judge him as Mored B'Malchut, Lo nanash alav. David wasn't punished as Zeh Reshut HaMelech because the king has discretion that way. And V'hu adin ikra milchama. It's just like war. It's just like war. Okay, so let's sum it up to this point. The Netziv says that a king has the right to send people out to war. And in the context of war, the king has the right to judge people as rebels and execute them, even if they have not committed a formal crime. And then in one of those places, the Netziv says, and by the same token, the people, or seems to say, on the same token, the people who go out to war don't have to worry about the lives of the others. Equally indiscriminately, because the king has the right to send you to kill whomever you want. Very, very difficult to understand. What I think is clear that you can't adapt the Netziv as a basis for war without, at the very least, giving the king absolute right to declare martial law. That all this applies to a Milchemet Reshut, which is in the authority of the king, and may have nothing to do with Milchemet Mitzvah, and we should be aware that maybe Milchemet Mitzvah has stricter rules than Milchemet Reshut. We don't understand that. But I would say there's that one line in Netziv, right? Kikach nosad ha'olam, that war is not illegal, and he's bothered that in war it seems that the king has the right to do things that should be prohibited. he extends that to the king warping the justice system, that there are no rules about Moed B'Malchut. I have my doubts whether any of us would be comfortable with his rule about Moed B'Malchut, that you can deliberately arrange the execution of somebody who has done nothing wrong, because after all, it's wartime, the king can kill whoever he wants. That doesn't seem to be the rules under which we generally function. And by the same token, once we feel constrained to say that we're not willing to go as far as the Netziv appears to go in the domestic discretion of the king, so we'll have to impose the same limits on the on war the other way. So, if you want to believe that at least in wartime, the king has absolute power, and there are no restrictions in terms of the king murdering, and then we're going to extend the king to the state, so the state can murder whoever it wants, not just send them out to war. Then in Echanami, you could imagine that Milchemet Reshut certainly has no ethical boundaries. I don't think anyone really wants to go that way, so I imagine that we would in fact impose constraints on the death of Uriah as well, in some way, and would have to impose that as well. But I can't deny that there is an Netziv that says this, and that there is an approach. Rav Shechter does it in a different way. We'll see Rav Shechter in a moment. Rav Shechter just builds the same argument off the Netziv and also off the Minchas Chinuch, who says, look, there are three things. Right? It sounds like we have a value that says that that there are only three things that transcend human life. So why can we have a Milchemet Reshut? Or why can we have a Milchama for any other purpose? And so the Minchas Chinuch says it must be that statement that only three things transcend life is only true in peacetime. So Rav Shechter makes the same kind of argument that if it transcends our lives, then surely it transcends the other side's lives. Who says? I'm not convinced, and we'll see at the end that in probably the most problematic source will do, which is going to take up, I think, largely the whole second half, Rosh Yisraeli, that he actually addresses this question seriously. The challenge of Israeli is that he takes the moral questions more seriously than anybody else, but perhaps, and not coincidentally, comes up with the answers in many ways that are because they're more serious in a way, they're more troubling. Okay, so I'm starting from Rav Lichtenstein. I said that up front. I think that the attempt to use the Gemara in Shavuos as a way out of it is not compelling at all, because Gemara in Shavuos is not talking about the other side at all. There's a version of that argument which is based on the Netziv, which is to say that we can derive from the fact that we can have casualties on our side, that we can have casualties on the other side. But it seems to be intuitive that you can say that, okay, there's some degree of authority within a political system that doesn't apply across political systems, and that there are all sorts of powers that a government has over its citizens that it doesn't have over non-citizens. And so the argument to me doesn't follow at all. Although I can't deny that there is that one place where the Netziv says Kikach nosad ha'olam. But I'm hesitant, for building universes out of silence. If the Netziv had a book in which he talked about military ethics, and that's what he said, great. But he has a line in a different, in one context. I don't build so much out of it. And even along the way, he still reads the Gemara in Shavuos as being about our side and not the other side. Okay, so let's move now on to a source that is quoted by Rav Shechter. Rabbi Chaim Jachter quotes it in Rav Shechter's name as well. And I want to read the source first, and then we'll see how it's used. Okay. Let's share screen again. Okay, so let's take a look at the Maharal, and we're still in order of the pages. We're on page 6 now. So this is Maharal's Perush on Rashi, and we're in the realm of We're in the realm of the story of Dinah. So the Maharal starts with the question that from a moralist perspective you want to ask. Ach kasha, right? What justifies Shimon and Levi in massacring the city? The Shechem sin, but what sin did the other people of the city commit? So he quotes the Rambam, right? So the Rambam turns this into a private rule of judgment, that the people of the city failed to bring Shechem to justice. This is a violation of the Gentile, the Noachite commandment of Dinim, and you're chayiv mita for all of them, and therefore that's what justifies Shimon and Levi. I just point out that we have one other famous case where the brothers sit as a beit din and condemn someone to death. That is when they condemn Yosef to death. We don't think so positively of the brothers' capacity to engage in dispassionate judgment in that context. Every time somebody tries to justify Shimon and Levi, you have the question: okay, but in Chumash, who do you think is right, Shimon and Levi, or do you think Yaakov, who says that you've done something terrible and curses them afterward? Be that as it may. That's the Rambam's answer, and famously the Ramban responds. The Maharal quotes him. I skipped this. That dinim is a mitzvah aseh, and the chi of misa is only for mitzvah lo taseh, not mitzvah aseh. But the Maharal now asks a different question. He says, "V'emes dvartei mahem elu advarim." But all this is astounding. Ki eich efshar lehem ladunit ben nesi haaretz. How plausible is it to expect the rest of the city to bring their prince to justice? Very likely the people of Shechem were afraid of Shechem and his father Hamor. And the whole mitzvah of dinim, that only applies when you have the capacity to judge. Right? But if you can't do it, you can't do it. Right? So this is going to become a big issue that we will discuss again when we get to Rabbi Israeli. But to what degree do we hold people collectively responsible for a collective failure when individually they could not have solved the problem? Right? So it's true, you could say the whole society failed to bring Shechem to justice, so let's wipe out the whole society. Or you could say no individual could have brought Shechem to justice, and we don't reasonably we don't punish people for their failure to ignite revolutions, when it's very unlikely that had they attempted to act on their own, they would have succeeded. So the Maharal takes the position, which is going to be valuable for other purposes later, that no, you cannot judge people for a collective failure when individually it would have been a risk, at least probably to life and possibly to something else, for them to perform this mitzvah. And this is bracketing the question for now of are there things for which you need to be moser nefesh, which are Hel Yavor? But here we're not dealing with prevention; we're dealing with judgment after the fact, right? So far as I know, nobody believes that it's Yareg Vel Yavor to allow a murderer to escape judgment. Okay, so the Maharal says, how could we possibly? What is the Rambam talking about? How could we possibly hold?
Aryeh.
How could we possibly hold Shechem liable, the city of Shechem liable for the actions of their political leader, when it's plausible to assume that their political leader had the power of the gendarmerie, or at least that the regular citizens had no way of knowing that they wouldn't be shot by the authorities if they protested. So the Maharal answers, but it seems to me this is not difficult at all. Because the situation, the thing you're talking about, right? The situation we're talking about private punishment of people for violation of mitzvahs is not similar to a case where you have two umot, Kigo b'nei Yisrael u'Kna'anim, sorry, like the Jews and whatever the word Canaanite means here, shehem shnei umot, who are two different nations. How do we know that? K'dichsiv v'yinu lam echad, right? So because right, Shechem and Hamor say we're going to become one nation. So obviously, if you're going to become one nation, you originally were two nations. So the Shimon and Levi are committing a national crime against another nation. And therefore, Shimon and Levi were entitled to fight against the city of Shechem, like any nation going to fight against any other nation which the Torah permits. And even though you'll tell me the Torah says, right, that we have to call Shalom out, right? This was they engaged in a surprise sneak attack, but the Torah says that when you go to a city to attack it, you have to call out peace first. That's only when there has been no prior wrong. Even though only one of them did it, since they're part of the nation, because that nation is the one that did the first wrong, mutarim likach nikmatam mehem. V'achanami kol milchamot shehem nimsaim kagon saror temidyanim. V'afagav dehayu arbei shlo asu, even though many people were not engaged in this, in Midian as well. Ein ze chiluk kevan shaya be'ota uma she'asa ra lehem mutarim lavo alehem b'milchama v'chein heim kol ha'milchamot. Okay, so this is really quite scary. Maral says that war is fought between nations, and therefore, if one member of another nation does something wrong to you, so if they were if two private citizens do wrongs to each other, then obviously you can't go do wrong. You can't expand the circle of violence and wrongdoing. But if you have a wrong done by a citizen of another nation to your nation, then you can go kill the entire other nation. Right? That's what that's what the simple meaning of this is. I would note that the simple meaning of this is again reversible. Right? It's that it seems to me that if one Jew does something wrong to some of another nation, well, boom, we have it won't be anti-Semitic to go try and commit genocide against the Jews, because it's not that, it's just the nature of war. Okay, right. So that's right. So that's right. That is a scary thing, right? That saw Miriam's question in the chat, right? So that's like really like how far do we go, right? Do we say on the one hand, right? Do we say that we start off by saying we never hold people responsible for the actions of their collective unless they can individually vary them, right? That seems like an extreme removal of responsibility. And now we'll say, but it doesn't matter whether we hold them responsible or not, because even if it wasn't their political leadership, it was just somebody in the other nation who did wrong to us. Now we can go take revenge. Also point out that what's his definition of Ummah? It's a little bit odd because he says Canaanim, but obviously Shechem is not the entirety of the Canaanite nation. Now we're going to, right? What happens if the person who had done it was, I don't know, I don't want to credit people was Atlantean. We can now go wipe out all of Atlantis, even though the person did it as while visiting in Shechem. I have grave difficulty taking this Maharal as any kind of source, both because I don't believe that I or anyone else would accept the reversible version applying to Jews. I don't see any way in which you can limit this to just the city of Shechem, and just overall, like, how could it just be like that? Like all interpersonal wrongs, as long as they cross national boundaries, create legitimacy of genocide. Just right, find it utterly impossible to believe. And part of this, I think, is just I have difficulty dealing with Maharal, who believes in the realities of metaphysics in ways that I have trouble handling. Is certainly going to be the case that to deal with war as a phenomenon, to some extent, we're going to have to treat abstractions, political groups, as if they are as if they are the actors as opposed to individuals in the case. But to do it as absolutely as Maharal does here, as a basis for halacha, seems to me impossible. Rabbi Jachter's article quotes Rabbi Blau, Rabbi Aryeh Gutel, who tried to argue, well, look, this Maharal is just a parish on Rashi on Chumash, and that's not a basis for halacha. And I think that's a good argument. Also, I point out, like, whenever somebody justifies Shimon and Levi, so you don't know whether that means they think Shimon and Levi are right, or they're just giving you the best svara for Shimon and Levi, but Yaakov really wins, except for the Rambam, who's paskening, but the Maharal is a parish on Rashi and Chumash. So those are all good formal arguments for saying that I'm not, that I wouldn't want to be samech on the Maharal, but fundamentally I have to say, like, I wouldn't anyway. It's just like, I can't imagine anyone can bear those consequences. And here I'm going to make an argument, which you'll see if you buy or not, which is that when I first read Rabbi Jachter's article many years ago, I think I wrote a fairly intemperate response to him privately, because just the Maharal, just like, do you really think this? Do you really think that that a wrong committed by one Jew against another nation creates the right of a war of revenge against the entire Jewish people? Do you think, oh no, that's only if somebody does something to the Jews, but not vice versa? Like, how do you even get there? So when this was put out again recently, Rabbi Alex Ozer, who I think is still here, correctly pointed out that I had reacted too much to the Maharal and not enough to the people quoting. So I want to take a look at the version of Rav Hershel Schechter's article on war, which builds off Maharal, and here's what he says. And Bemis Kal V'chomeru Bisman Hazeh. Right, so the state of Israel is in a state of war, and we'll have to talk about what that means later. Okay, so Rav Schechter's position, which we will take up again later, perhaps, which is that terrorist attacks to some extent can be seen as a continuation of the state of war beginning in the War of Independence. Right? There's never been a peace treaty outside of Egypt, so we can talk about that. Sharei Aravim, now he uses the word Arabs, which I think is one of the problems here, that the Arabs is not a Halakhic category. Tuanim beferish of Pemale, Shemerasim Yerushalayim et Tel Aviv et Haifa v'chule v'chule, Humela tzrichim anshe tzahal linhogim kol hamishtafim be'elu hapraot, k'mo shenagim b'shat milchama mamash. So now, right, first narrowing. Therefore, the army has to be, the IDF has to behave with all those who participate in those attacks, in the same way that they would react, that they would act in a state of actual war. Okay, we don't view them as side criminal actions. If there's a need for it, that they should shoot to kill. And if there is a need for this, and if it's absolutely necessary, because sometimes it's impossible to clarify who are the terrorists, who are the people organizing the attacks and the terrorist actions. According to what is needed to win. Even others of the same nation who are innocent of wrong. And so what Rabbi Ozer pointed out to me correctly, right, is here it says and here it says and here it says that Rav Shechter is very clear that the only justification for shooting to kill is if it is necessary to win the war. It is right. And then he says even things like even shooting the terrorists is only necessary, is only legitimate to shoot to kill, and shooting innocents is only acceptable if it's necessary to win the war. And then he quotes the Maharal. So what I said is I don't see any way to get that out of the Maharal. So I think it must represent, which I don't object to at all, a prior moral commitment. That that if the Maharal were taken literally, then I wouldn't take it because that doesn't make any sense. The only way to use the Maharal is by putting in limitations that don't appear in the Maharal, and which are hard to square with the action. Right, if you want to ground it in the issue in Shechem, very hard to square it with the outcome of the story in Shechem. So I took this as an instinctive moral limitation on a source, but the truth is that I think it sort of starts on the assumption that we need to find a heter for killing non-combatants in war. We don't want to find a heter that lets you kill indiscriminately in war. Well, we found a heter that allows us to kill non-combatants, so let's say it only applies discriminately. I'm more comfortable saying that it's in the nature of war that there are going to be civilian casualties, and what we should be looking for is the restraints. I'm less interested in the source, and quoting sources that have no restraints is dangerous. So I wouldn't do it this way. But I think I'm okay pointing out that that's what Rav Shechter did. And I think that if you look at the English versions, which I think are not by Rav Shechter himself, they're usually translations. So it's still there, but there's something that snuck in to that snuck into English translation, which is not in the Hebrew, which is, but as regards those who attack the Jews as Amalek did, even if only one of their members was responsible for this act. So I have no idea where how Amalek got into the English translation of the text that has no Amalek in the Hebrew. And that obviously is really dangerous. Because there's certainly no ethical restrictions on Amalek. Right, the text above the line says, even when kill when necessary in times of war, right, and that I think is exactly what we said, but the introduction of Amalek is simply dangerous. And it could be that I originally saw the English and not the Hebrew, and that's what set me off. But I'm going to set this up. That's my thesis, that I don't see how anybody who just reads the Maharal can say, oh, and obviously it has all these limitations of extreme necessity. Then we have to figure out what that necessity means, right? Right? That's a really, that's a standard that is very much like the notion of proportionality, because it means it's not about the battle, it's about the war. The question which I think Adina asked in the chat, which is the right question, which we're going to have to address in the context of the whole shiur, is one of the ways in which halacha is certainly weak about this, or that hasn't done its job. The job would have to do, if you think halacha should do it, is that halacha is almost, there's a little bit of halacha about the king, and then there's a lot about what individual soldiers can do. We haven't talked about, but particularly if I'm right, that the Gemara in Shavuos only talks about what the casualties the king can plan on amongst his own army, and not talk about the other side. So what sorts of inevitable casualties are you allowed to plan for? When you're setting a military action. So the soldier in the middle of the action might say, well, look, I have to shoot this person or else I'll get killed. Right. But but if a planner has two plans of action, how do they choose among them in terms of civilian casualties? And that would be a fairly rigorous standard to say that you can't have civilian casualties at all unless this activity is necessary for the war. And that's very much like the proportional to military value that is the standard of proportionality currently assumed in international law. So if that was really said, right, if that's really the key line, is kafia dorish l'natseach b'milchama, I would be okay with this. I just don't know that, I think that this is being imported, and because it's not really naturally emerging from the Makarot, I think it's vulnerable to this kind of insertion, right, as Amalek did, which honestly I don't know that Rosh Hashanah would ever have seen. Because I don't know that he ever I don't know that he takes responsibility for the English versions of his articles, and there are multiple of them also. So I don't know. Okay, that is the end of my discussion of the Maharal. So we have one other source to do, and then we'll break. But I thought I would stop for a moment if there was a question that somebody felt, or a reaction that somebody felt was really important to say at this point. Okay. Oh, yes, Adina.
I mean, in regards to the Maharal and how you're saying that there's reciprocity, I mean, if you look at Ramban's comment about when Sarah is mean to Hagar and causing Hagar to run away, he seems to say that yes, this makes sense that we are oppressed by the descendants of Hagar because Sarah oppressed her and Abraham let it happen.
Yeah, I think that's another good example. That would be a good basis for arguing that we should assume that kind of reversibility. Right? That the Ramban is perfectly happy to say that we get punished for what we do wrong to them as much as they get punished for what we do wrong for what they do wrong to us.
Right. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's also that it's an individual before there even was a Jewish people.
Yeah, and yet it becomes national. Well, with you both ways. Thank you. With you both ways. Okay, so let's do one more before we break, and then we'll get to try this. In a sense, this is the easy stuff because the really hard thing will be to try and deal with Rabbi Israeli. And I don't know how far. I hope we'll get far. Okay, so in Divrei Yamim, right? God comes to David and says, David described, "Vahi alai dvar Hashem." Right, the word of God came upon me, and it said, "Dam larov shafachta, u'milchamok delot asita, lo tivna bayit lishmi, ki damim rabim shafachta artza lefanai." Right, so something about David's past makes him ineligible to build the Beit Hamikdash. On this, the Radak says as follows: Dam larov shafachta, zeh lo matzana shalmar lo Hashem. So the first fascinating thing, Radak says, but look, we look in Sefer Malachim, and we never find that God ever said this to David. David Amar Cain Bilibo. So this is David's conscience speaking. That's just a fascinating claim. That the Radak reads Vahi alai dvar Hashem as David had pangs of conscience. Right? David said in his heart, What it means is that God, that's why God is not letting him build a Beit Mikdash. And then much less interestingly, O Natan Navi Amar Lo Cain, or Natan Navi. And if I were building a universe, I would say that Tana Navi, it's the same as Bathsheba, right? So we're having so it and Aryeh it all plays out together, but it's much cooler, I think. The Radak says that it's pangs of conscience, right? And even though he says, right, even though this is not written in Sefer Shmuel, right? Not Malachim, sorry, it's not written in Sefer Shmuel. We have other places where there are nevuot that happen, right? Like Moshe Rabbeinu and the Meraglim, I think, right? That where there's dialogue that happens in Chumash, in what that this or in Tanakh that's left out of one telling of a story and appears in the other telling the story. Fine. Damim larov shafach arza. Ki dam nikim haya b'damim asher shafach. Kimo dam Uriah. V'zeh lefanai. Right. So God's saying to him, right, that you shed innocent blood, just for example Uriah, which is in front of me. Right. Arza lefanai. Gam Demei HaKohanim Hayahu Hasiba. So no of your Kohanim that Shaul and Doeg Hadomi kill. That's David's responsibility. Okay. So for Uriah is not a chiddush that is innocent and David is responsible. No of your Kohanim is not a chiddush that is innocent, but holding David responsible, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe he should have known that Shaul was going to come after them. We go further. Gam B'Dmei HaGoyim Asher Shafach. Otam shelo hayu b'nei milchamto, efshar shayu behem anashim tovim v'chasidim. Among the people, among the non-Jews, the Gentiles whose blood he shed, there were among those who were not b'nei milchamto, and maybe among those who were not b'nei milchamto, there were people who were good and pious. Afal pikein lo nenash alehem, nonetheless he was not punished for them. Ki kavanato lechalot rashaim shleifritzu b'Yisrael, because his intent was to wipe out the to wipe out the wicked so that they not attack Israel. Right, then we have a line that is talking about David's sojourn when he's hiding out from Shaul with the Plishtim, and he kills people. And I'm gonna skip this line for now because Rav Asher Weiss doesn't quote it, and there's a whole machlokas which Rishonim have interpreted. I'm going to tell you it's a problematic line, but it's problematic on its own right. It doesn't play a role in the conversation about war. I felt unfair leaving it out because it could have been a very interesting and challenging source for unlimited killing in war, but no one quotes it, so I'm just leaving it there for you to see. But because David, it happened to him that he shed lots of blood. Right, so he was prevented from building the temple. So David's prevented building the Beit Hamikdash, just like you can't use iron to cut the stones of the altar. right? Why? Because the metal is used to make killing things, so you can't make out of it something which was intended to be for peace. So David somehow became a killing tool. Okay, but at the same time, we have this line, right, that David killed people shelo yavdei milchamto, and maybe the anashim tovim b'chasidim among them. Is that a precedent for civilian casualties? So here's what Rav Asher Weiss says about it. I have one caveat. This is in Minchas Asher Dvarim Siman Lamed Bet. It's also still on the website of Rav Asher Weiss. However, I am told by Dov Weinstein that it is not in the reprinting of the Minchas Asher on Dvarim. And I have sent a message through. I asked Ellie Fisher, who's sometimes speaks with Rav Asher, who said he'd try to find out for me, but I have not yet found out why it is that this siman does not appear in the new printing of Minchas Asher Dvarim. But here's what he says: So after he quotes the Radak, we've learned from him the Ikar Hadin ein lihimana meharigat harotzchim af im hachafim pipesha neharagim mehem. So he takes it as a private matter. Right, if the only way to get rid of murderers is that they're innocents among them. So Meikar Adin, you're allowed to kill the innocent to get the murderers. Under what circumstance? You've read not as a judicial thing. So presumably it's to prevent the murderers from murdering again. Maybe that line is a little bit. What exactly Meikar Adin here is not clear to me. Right, therefore David is not punished because David did something justifiable. But nonetheless, God prevented him from building the Beit HaMikdash. We discover here that there is some kind of flaw, real flaw of bloodshedding in what David did. בוודאי יש להשתדל במניעת הריגתם של אלה שלא פשעו ולא חטאו, אך כשאי אפשר, גם הם נשרפים עם אלה שבקרבם שמצווה להרגם. So Rav Asher Weiss puts in the same kind of qualification, or even a string, right, that you certainly have to make the effort to prevent the killing of those who have not sinned in your attempt to kill the murderers, but when it's impossible, so then they are also swept up along with those whom it is a mitzvah to kill. So now we have moved it to those whom it is a mitzvah to kill. So he's not talking about, it doesn't sound like Rav Weiss is talking about Milchemet Reshut in some sense. That's problematic in its own right as to what sorts of wars of David are we talking about. Since almost everybody understands that we're talking here about David's wars of Reshus. It seems to me that he takes a much more serious read of the. Right, it's not just that David became a tool, and there are commentaries who say that it's like the Rambam, who seems to think it's just that it either reflects something about David's character or it caused a change in David's character. Rav Asher Weiss seems to think that there's something wrong he did here, and we have to see. Right, therefore he should have tried to stop. He should have tried to stop it. But if it's impossible, right, kishi efshar, then there is a right. Okay, so I think that's the same kind of phenomenon, that he's taking a source that doesn't have these restrictions, and he's imposing those restrictions, which I'm okay with, because I would also like to impose those restrictions. I think what they're telling you is that these sources are not seeking to give you halacha l'masa instructions. They're just trying to solve a problem in a text, and the way to solve a problem in a text is, okay, in wartime, there are things you can do that you can't do in the rest of wartime. Yes, if we just read the story simply, that would lead us to think that you can do anything in wartime, but they're not willing to say that. So it must be that somehow we'll have to give a more detailed account of the war, in which we'll figure out how their actions meet this standard. And in the case of David HaMelech, maybe they didn't quite meet the standard. Like the simplest way out of it is to say that David HaMelech killed people in a way that God can't take judicial cognizance of, but he can take moral cognizance of, because David wasn't careful enough. So I have these two sources which I'm going to quote with caution. And Dov already thought I shouldn't quote the second one, but I'm going to do it anyway, and we'll see. Right, we'll see how it plays out. Rav Yosef has a famous, gorgeous tshuva, about Kohanim who are soldiers, right? Sheishtadvu b'kravot neged tzvaot Mitzrayim, Yarden, Syria, who fought in the war against the armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria in the Jewish fight, and they killed people among the soldiers of the enemy. Are they prevented from duchening in order to because they killed? The Ravadi's response is chas v'shalom. In order to get this chas v'shalom, he quotes the Radak, and he says, "Look, the Radak says that David is prevented from building the Beit Hamikdash only because of the possibility that he killed people shelo hayu b'nei milchamto v'efshar shu b'em anashim chasidim v'tovim chasidim." Right. So obviously, says Ravadia, right, there was David would not have been prevented from building the Beit Hamikdash if he had only killed soldiers, or at least he only killed soldiers who were bnei milchamta. And there, right, so Ravadia says, right, so right, mashma shel etzav hamilchama lo hayuro oilamono. So David HaMelech could have built the Beit Hamikdash if he had not had this, right, there was not this flaw that he killed the people who did not need killing. Right, and I think Ravadia draws a proper analogy between Birkat Kohanim and the Beit Hamikdash, because Birkat Kohanim via Sem L'cha Shalom, right? It's a question whether a Kli Milchama can become a Kli Shalom. So the question that one has to ask about this, but what would Ravadia say of somebody who killed civilians in the course of a military action? Right, what are standards for that? So on the next page, I give you that Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein in Chashukei Chemed has an article about somebody who says that they have nightmares because they're afraid they might have shot a terrorist after they had raised their hands. And Rav Zilberstein's response is, well, I think that it's really hard to make that kind of distinction in wartime, but when the time comes to build the Beit HaMikdash, probably you shouldn't. Now, I argue over time that Rav Zilberstein Chashukei Chemed is not halacha l'maaseh psak, and people take it that way, and I can't help it. But in his introduction, he tells you he's just trying to show you ways in which you can apply gemaras to cases, and I just find too many of the responses so beyond the pale of what I would consider to be normative psak that I'm just not that I think it has to be treated as a pedagogic effort. And he doesn't say anything about Birkat Kohanim here. And I think that if Ravadia were asked that question, Ravadia would say, you're really right. If you shot somebody unnecessarily, then you couldn't duchen. But there's a sveika here. Maybe the person didn't raise their hands. Maybe if they raised their hands, they were faking. Right? So Ravadia, I think in the end, right, if you had a soldier who served in good faith, I think Ravadia would find ways to let that person duchen if it came up. Nonetheless, Rav Zilberstein does, draw the implication, I think, which is that there is a potentially serious consequence when you kill somebody in war who doesn't need killing. And I pointed out in a written version of the when I wrote this up, I pointed out that it's also not clear to me that Rav Weiss is correctly reading the meaning of the Radak, even aside from the question of whether he's correct about putting all these restrictions in, because Radak is talking about osam shlo hayu b'nei milchamto, and Rajafter explicitly translates that as non-combatants. But the Radak uses a phrase elsewhere, and what it means is people who are not part of the war. And meaning if you kill the allies of the people whom you're at war with. Right? It's not talking about civilians who are members of the same nation as the warriors. It's talking about it's not about people in war from the other nation, and we're dealing with this circumstances like Hector and Achilles in the Iliad, right, when Achilles tells Hector to please, Hector tells Achilles to please leave because I don't want to kill you. Right, when you had a war when it was still possible in the context of war to tell somebody, well, look, I have no quarrel with you. So if that's right, then Radak doesn't actually tell us anything one way or the other about civilians. Right, and right, that's also, as we'll see, Shlomo Israeli again gets correct that the story that people quote about when Shaul comes to fight the Amalekim, and he tells the Keni to leave them. He's not telling the women and children of the Kenim to leave. He's telling the soldiers of the Kenim who are fighting with Amalek, this is not your quarrel. So please leave. And that's very common in all sorts of ancient wars, that you make an appeal to the allies, right? You tell the allies of the other side, we have no quarrel with you. Why do you need to die here? Why, right? Can't you leave? So there are all sorts of ways Mishra Dak, I think, is not necessarily a good precedent. What I get out of here really is that Rav Asher Weiss, in order to make it a precedent, right, feels compelled again to put in the line, right, Afkesh Efshar. And that he takes the failure, the prevention of building Beit HaMikdash as a real moral flaw, and I think that I have shown that Rav Adia does the same, and that's picked up by Rav Zilberstein, even though neither Rav Weiss nor Rav Zilberstein quote Rav Adia. I think that's probably where they're both coming from. That Rav Adia's reading of it, that really it's not just that because you did this, it's that because you did something wrong by doing this. Okay, I think that's a good point to break. We come back, we'll do the Mizrahi very briefly, and then we'll do Rosh Israeli in as much time as we have. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to riskily stop the recording. Okay, since I just put it in the chat, but I didn't actually say it out loud, and it's possible people will listen to the shas in the audio. So we'll say the shir is the Zechut Chayalei Tzahal. Brief summary of where we are now is that there is a position that war is an halakhic and ethical zone. You can quote sources to support that. The interesting thing is that at least some of the contemporary poskim who quote it, maybe all, insert qualifications into that appear to be ethical, which I'm fine with. That fits with the lead quote I had from Lichtenstein at the outset, that you can't really say that war is a different zone. And all four of the requirements they put in, or at least some of them, but they're not sourced. And if we want halakha to say something about war, as opposed to just say, oh, look, we can fit halakha in, then we haven't accomplished much so far, except quote a few contemporary people. Okay, so there's one approach we could take is to try and very precisely import narrow. We could try to precisely import private halacha into the realm of war, and the easiest way to do that is in the frame of Rodef. So just put on the source sheet. Yeah, that's better off if I do it with the Word document, I think. Sorry. Here. So I put on the source sheet a Mizrahi. This is again a commentary on Rashi, and it's true that there isn't much about war in we're on page 9 of the source sheet now. In classical sources, we're finding, so we're forced to go to the point of Rashi. Sorry, I just wanted to expand the realm there. One more try. Sorry. Okay, so Mizrahi on maybe my favorite Rashi on Chumash. Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer Vayira Yaakov shema yehareg vayetzer shema yeharog esacherim. Right, so Yaakov is afraid lest he kill others. This is in the night before, when he's worried about the confrontation with Esav that is coming up. So Mizrahi deals with some of the questions we've seen before. The question he asks is, why is Yaakov worried? Right, there's a war, and so why should he be worried about killing people? So after all, we have the rule of Rodef, we have the rule of Bab Macheret, Abalacha Hargacha Ashkem Lahargo. So he says maybe Yaakov's worried because some of the people that Esav brought with him, maybe Esav is bringing them against their will, and therefore he shouldn't kill them because they're unwilling combatants. So he says a fascinating thing, which is that as opposed to by Shem, he thinks that, and even according to the people who hold reasonably that the obligation to be Moser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, to give up your life to sanctify God's name, applies only to Jews. But that means that
Rabbi Klapper, I think you're freezing up on
I'm sorry. That's probably just my internet. I don't have any better way of doing it. Hope it gets better. I could try the Bilam thing and build altars in different parts of my house, but the experience is not. Does everybody else have the same issue?
I could maybe just go back a minute to what you were saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
we missed a bit.
Okay, thank you. So what I said was that the Mizrahi addresses the question of why Yaakov is worried about killing Esav's men. Right? Sounds like he's worried about killing Esav's men, not just specifically Esav, and certainly not only Esav. So why is that? So he suggests the possibility that it's because maybe it's because Esav's men are innocent, even though they wish to kill him, because they're being brought against their will. They're conscripts, and maybe Yaakov is worried morally about killing conscripts, he has no direct quarrel with. And his response is that even according to the people who hold that Gentiles have no obligation limsor nafsham lo kiddush Hashem, they have no obligation to give up their lives rather than in order to sanctify God's name, and therefore, let's say that Gentiles can worship avodah zarah under threat, and can violate Gili Arayos under threat of death. But he says the reason you can't commit murder to save your life has nothing to do with Kiddush Hashem. The reason you can't commit murder to your life is a svara. Who says your life is better than his? Your blood is better than his. And therefore he thinks that Gentiles have an obligation to give up their lives rather than agree to murder somebody else. And therefore Esav's men were liable if they came along with Yaakov. I have to figure out, is that still, are we still in that private context there? Or are we in war? He seems to still be dealing with it in a private context. Now the question, what happens if they didn't want to kill Yaakov, they just wanted to wound Yaakov? All sorts of really interesting side questions. The upshot of it is that what Yaakov is worried about is that maybe there are people in Esav's army that he could disable. And he could save his life without killing them. Right. So what he says is that we have a general principle that a rodef shechol hasil bechad me'evarav, that a pursuer whom you can kill, where you can stop from killing by disabling them, by cutting off one of their limbs, as opposed to killing them. So according to the Rambam, you're chayav misa b'dei shemayim for killing them. Certainly, it's a wrong to kill them unnecessarily. Okay, right. So he says, maybe Yaakov says, in an ela rodfim, maybe, they're just rodfim. V'lo reshut largon ela k'she'en yachol hatzil ha'nidaf b'echad me'verav. You can only kill them, when in a situation when there's no possibility of saving the nirdaf without killing them the entire way. Pachad, and Yaakov is afraid. Shema yaharog mehem berov bilbulo bish'as milchama. He's afraid that he'll kill them in the time of war. Even though there are people in the war who are not trying to kill, but to be careful. What he's saying is that there are people in the time of war who are not trying to kill Yaakov. And so Yaakov is worried he's going to kill those people because those people are not at war with him. But he's afraid he's going to kill non-combatants in the course of war. When he wouldn't have to kill them, he could just disable them. So what the Mizrahi seems to be doing is saying that you can apply the law of Rodef, including the restriction of Shema Yachol Hasil Be'echad Me'evarav, and maybe including the exception to that, because normally we hold that in the case of above Machteret, the furtive trespasser, we don't have this requirement. So, right, all sorts of issues. Maybe it's different if your life is directly threatened, if you're trying to save somebody else's threatened. So the Mizrahi opens up a whole different way of doing this, which is maybe we should import all the laws of private, Good Samaritan law into war. There's a whole bunch of people who object to this. I gave you the Tumas Onech, who I confess I didn't even look up who he is, but he quotes the Knesset Agdola, who says, "What are you talking about? Obviously, Rodef Shechol Tzil Vechad Meverav only applies in private contexts. It doesn't make any sense in the context of war. Nobody is capable of thinking that way. Nobody can know in war, right, what's necessary and what's not necessary. So that's simply wrong." Other people will try and say, okay, so the precedent for war is not Rodef but Bab Machteret. Doesn't give you much grounds in the realm of precedent. I'm sorry, as Yamlet Yaakov says, right, that I'm not sure it was explicit in Mizrahi. It's right. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says explicitly, right. I thought that this is worth seeing. It says, "Va'afilu im nizbor she'ena mitzvah kiddush Hashem." Even if non-Jews are not obligated in kiddush Hashem, mikol makom im yamrilo zil katil fanya v'lo katil alach l'chuyav limsor nafsho mishum mai chazit. And he quotes there from the Mishnah Melech. Okay, so you could try to solve the whole problem. Once upon a time, I was tempted to try to do this, to say let's just import all the laws of Rodef, or the laws of Rodef from Bab Machteret, and all those private laws. Let's try and find a way, mutatis mutandum, to turn them into the laws of war. I suspect not, but you should be aware of the option. If you're going to import Rodef Shechol Tzil Vechad Meverav, you're going to have to ask the question that Adina asked earlier, which is at what level? Do you import at the level of the soldier? That seems really, really implausible. At the level of the person giving orders, at the level of the person creating tactics, at the level of the person creating strategy. I think that that idea that even in self-defense we don't allow killing when lesser measures are necessary, and at the same time we understand that there's certain cases, particularly preemptively, where it doesn't seem to make sense at all to put in that restriction. Those are valuable data to make sure that we're still to derive values which we can then import as values into war. But the notion of just seeing war as a private situation of Rodef writ large, that seems less compelling to me, but I should put it out. Okay, that brings us, and I want to thank Rabbi Francis Nataf, who is not on this call, I don't think, for making me do this. Sorry, did I do it again? For pointing out that I really have to address the article by Rav Shlomo Yisraeli on the subject, which is probably the seminal Israeli article on the subject. And I want to say up front, that I'm a little hesitant to do it because it's so much better than everything else, and yet it's also scary in all sorts of ways. I'm sorry. Okay, no, sorry. I don't have time. I think it would take many, many hours to do this. It's a 50-page article, which is packed on every. I don't have the. No. I don't have the. I don't have the capacity to go through the arguments well enough with you. So I'm going to try and do a summary of the article, and then right some of his right. Much of the source sheet is excerpts from his article, but I'm not going to do justice to the argumentation. I have to be upfront about that. Okay, so what he does, or Israeli first does, is right. He's dealing with a particular context. The context he's dealing is Israeli raid in 1953 on the town of Kivia, which at the time was in Jordan. There had been a terrorist attack. There were a whole series of terrorist attacks across the Jordanian border. Again, we're 1953. One of them had been quite deadly. An IDF team led by I don't know what his rank was then, Ariel Sharon, wasn't yet a general, went across to the town of Akivia across the border, and blew up a number of houses. And it turned out, to what extent they were aware of this or not in advance, it turned out that there were still civilians in those houses. They blew up like 40 houses, and something like 60 civilians died. There was a whole outcry. In 1954, Rav Shlomo Yisraeli writes an article taking on the question of whether this can be justified. To understand the argument, we need to understand. Sorry, I know you lost me. I wasn't talking during the break. So in an Israeli set of facts, it's obvious that the attackers came from the village of Gibeah, and right, so that's not a fact, and it's obvious that most of the town supports the attacks. But there were children killed in the attack because not everybody evacuated their homes, and so the question he's asking is there any way to just an attack that certainly kills many non-combatants, including children? So the first thing he does, and he spends a lot of time on this, is seeing if there are non-war justifications for this. Okay, and I think it's important to understand why he does that. Why is it obvious to him this is war? And the answer is because it's a village, right? You're not attacking the enemy army. So it's not clear that it's war. But right, and it's not clear to him that war would give you more space than private space, at least as a theory. You have to figure out what the article is really doing, because it is a halakhic article that is not wholly focused on the immediate issue. It's an intellectual tour de force. It has implications for many, many things, and he plays out the arguments in their own right. So I don't know how laser focused he is, and it could just be that he's doing this because the most intellectually sensible way to set it up is to go from non-law to law, or it could be that he has real issues about whether this is law, and whether this is war. Sorry, or this is war. Okay, so here's what it is. So his first option he brings up is, why don't we hold the village capitally responsible? Why don't we just say, look, this was Shechem all over again, and we're on Shimon and Levi's side. That's approach number one. Because look, there are these terrorists. They left these people left this village. They went to Israel. They killed. They go back, and as opposed to the village bringing them to justice, they're probably heroes. So why don't we just say that we have liability for that? A second approach is more radical. Let's say that the terrorists are agents of these people, because these people want them to do it. And let's hold the citizenry guilty of murder, even if so if you want to claim that they're even if the citizens' help isn't necessary, but the citizens are authorizing it, so they're accountable in the same way as you're accountable if you hire assassins. His third approach is, let's see everybody in the village not just as support, not just as sending them with enthusiasm. Let's say that they are doing things to enable these people for killing. For example, they're providing them hiding spaces when they go back, and therefore, we can kill them as enablers of Rodfin. Right. So those are Israelis' first three approaches, none of which have anything to do with war. Right. One is that the village is responsible, for not enacting justice. That's a political action, but not a war action. The second is that the villages are agents, are senders, and the terrorists are just agents. And the third is that the villagers are able. So he rejects one on the grounds, right? And here so I guess I want to put out I think I need to put out an introduction to the Israeli first, and I hope I will write this, but I realized as I tried writing this up, this already got way, way too long for the weekly essay. So I'm going to do the introduction briefly now, is that Rabbi Israeli doesn't reason explicitly in categories that we would recognize as ethical, in the sense he doesn't reason on the basis of an assumption that Jews and non-Jews are alike on all these issues. And he doesn't reason on the basis of the assumption that everything is reversible, that everything that's true that everything that Jews can do to non-Jews, non-Jews can do to Jews. At the same time, his outcomes are often really, really powerful ethically and certain and rest on interesting ethical principles. So I want to be upfront about that. That reading Rabbi Israeli, one of the big challenges is figuring out how we navigate the intersection between halakhic and ethical argumentation, and that'll become particularly powerful at the end, when he doesn't reach a conclusion that fits so well with ethics. I think we'll see if you agree with me. Okay, so he rejects number one, the idea that they're all capitally responsible, on the grounds, as we saw, which we saw earlier, on the grounds that that the villagers can't be held accountable, even if 99% of them would support the terrorists willingly, but you can't know which of them are doing so under duress because they're all under duress. Anybody who opposes the terrorists will likely be killed, and therefore, as a matter of private of criminal jurisdiction, right, of criminal law, you can't hold them accountable because you can't prove it. They could all, right? Any individual could be acting under duress. He gets rid of number 2 by saying that halachically, right? Here's an example. Halachically, non-Jews don't have agency. So you can't hold them liable, right? So he holds that non-Jews are not liable for hiring assassins. Right? That's a really really interesting way out, I guess. Take it as you want. He has now that has an implication that will play out much later, because the verse that is used to derive, there is a verse which seems to say that even though generally we don't halachically recognize agency from among non-Jews, that's not true for murder. But the Rambam doesn't quote the prohibition. Sorry. Right, but the Rambam doesn't quote the prohibition against hiring assassins in his tour of the Shav Mitzvah Bnei Noach in Hilchos Melachim, and therefore the Israeli decides that the Rambam paskins against the position that non-Jews are liable for hiring assassins. But what's powerful about that for our purposes later is that on the same token, he notes that the Rambam doesn't mention the prohibition against suicide in the context of Shav Mitzvah Bnei Noach. So one of the consequences of ruling the Rambam, taking seriously the Rambam's not listing hiring assassins in his description of Shvichot Damim in the Shav Mitzvah Bnei Noach, even though the Rambam does mention that in the context of the definition of Shvichut Damim for Jews, is that he also ends up saying that non-Jews do not have a prohibition against committing suicide. Okay, so with that, it will stay this time. Okay, so he rejects 3, the enabling. So he says, actually, it seems to him that that the grounds of enabling pursuers is good enough to enable you to kill civilians on a set of conditions, right? Because it's the same law as Rodef, so it can't be more than Rodef. So you can kill civilians if their help is significant, and if killing them is actually something necessary to stop the Rodef. Okay, right there. That's he thinks that you can apply the law of Rodef that way, and that is a version of the question of whether you can bomb munitions factories, right, on a war level. If that will stop the war, but he thinks that would not be enough to defend the raid on Kivia, because he says that according to both the Rambam and the Rabbi, that's a view we don't need to see, that children can only be considered. You can only kill people as accessories to Rodef if they are responsible. And children are not responsible, so children can't be killed as accessories to Rodef. And therefore, he argues that there's no non-war justification for the raid on Kivia. If we want to justify it, we have to make it war. Okay, so what happens if we make it war? So what he says is, so this is the first section, of this quote is where he tells you that where he tells you that non-Jews don't have non-Jews are not commanded about suicide. And that's going to be one of the ways in which there are differences ethically between Jews and non-Jews. You have to decide how you want to deal with. Okay, but then he goes on to war, right? So he's right. So far he's said that we can, right here. I'll give you the line. He says that if the whole congregation deliberately turns away from murders, so then they're accountable. All the adults are accountable for doing that, but the children, right? But the children are not, and therefore this was not enough to to get there. Okay, but now he's right. See, he says, what about what if we get to right? So that we've already seen all these. What happens if we get to the question of war? Okay, right. So he tries. That's we've done all that already. Okay, right. So actually, we should have one big moment here. So he says that, you know what, generally, right, I should explain his rejection number 3 in a more sophisticated way. Generally, he says, we think that you can, right, the Rambam has a case where he says you can throw luggage overboard as a rodev. So if you can throw luggage overboard as a rodev, that suggests that rodev doesn't require any degree of moral justification at all. Right, any degree of responsibility, right? If luggage can be rodev, so then you don't require moral responsibility. But there's the ambiguity. The Rambam seems to think that you can't kill a 1 second old child, even though the child is a rodev. So what's the difference between, right? If we think that in terms of the law of rodev, what is the difference between the law of rodev as applied to luggage and as applied to 1 second old children? Right, if in fact we don't require moral responsibility at all. So he argues that there is a general rule in terms of life saving that you're not allowed to save yourself at the expense of anything of anybody else's. The reason that you're allowed to, according to almost all Rishonim, you're allowed to, let's say, steal somebody's car to save your life, is because you can pay the car back. You can compensate them. But you cannot, right? But since you can't compensate somebody for taking their life, therefore, even if you cannot save yourself at the expense of someone else's life unless they have committed a moral wrong, right? So the law of rodev is applied to luggage, right? Is different than the laws of children because you're not taking the life, you're taking the luggage. You can always pay that back. But what that opens up, that's why it's going to matter to us, is what happens if the other person has in some way done something that that surrenders their right to their life. So we're not taken against their will. Okay, and that right now you'd say, how can a person do that? So the answer is, well, we've just saw that he believes that non-Jews are not commanded against suicide. And they're not commanded against suicide, so you can imagine a situation where we could say, right, you forfeited your right to have your life, in right when that is threatening the other person's life, and the context for that is war, right? So war for Rabbi Israeli is a radical space, because war is a space in which all people who are considered to be legitimately engaged in war are considered to have entered into a kind of suicide compact, where they where I apologize. Okay, right. So all people engaged in war, and the extent to which this is true of Jews and non-Jews, right? It's very important to try and figure out what the implications of this are. For now, let's assume there is no difference between Jews and non-Jews in this regard, because when Jews are legitimately engaged in war, then then they also have no prohibition against suicide, because the reason Jews are ordinarily prohibited against suicide is because God has certain rights to Jewish human beings, and if God legitimates war, then he gives up those rights. Right, so it turns out that war is a space where people have agreed to give up their lives under certain conditions, but not under other conditions. All right, when I go to war, right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm saying, I agree to give up my life, if I lose the bet, but it's essentially a bet. So Israeli ends up with a notion that war legitimates killing everybody who agreed to be part of the war, so long as you do so according to the agreed upon rules. And he says, you know what? Until the late 19th century, early 20th century, nobody ever thought of outlawing war. right? So that means that there was a general convention among the world. Everybody understood that when you went to war, these were the rules, and people agreed to be killed or not, right? To be killed in accordance with those rules. And now we have a much more sophisticated set of rules. And so he ends up, and this is one of the ways in which his position becomes enormously important in the, right? He takes the position that the state of Israel is bound by international law when it comes to war. Because because the ground of permission for war, according to him, and he has a more elaborate argument. He says that we have this principle called Dina Malchuta Dina. Dina Malchuta Dina allows the government to execute people for crimes. That must mean that how can the government execute people for crimes? The only way you could do that so halachically for Jews, you have this principle of matir atzmo lemita, that you have to say it before in order to be executed, you have to say, I know I committed the crime, and I agree, and I'm doing it so with full awareness that I'll be executed for it. He extends that all the way and says that all executions require the person to have agreed in advance that they would be executed if they committed this crime and were caught. And then he says the principle that allows us a dina malchuta dina internal to the state is exactly the same principle that allows war. War is just international dina malchuta dina. And the ground of it is always the consent of the people involved. Now that has all sorts of difficulties in terms of how you deal with war between autocratic states, or between autocratic state and democracy. It rests on a set of, that medieval philosophy generally assumed that we could construct the consent of the governed even in autocratic states. Right now, I have to get into Hobbes and issues like that. But that's Rabbi Israeli's basic ground of war. War, right? The only thing that excuses killing is an advance agreement on the parties involved to give up their right to life. The people only give up their right to life in accordance with the standard form of war, and therefore you can only kill people in war in accordance with the recognized rules of war. And that obviously, is not going to get you the raid on Gibeah. Now we could challenge this, right? It's a very, and I think many of us would, and say, what happens if the other side isn't playing by the rules of war, right? So are they right? Can you have private bargains, or the bargain has to be wholly international? Right? Does that mean that they lose the protections of the laws of war also? And therefore, right? None of this, unfortunately, that is not something Rabbi Israeli deals with in any kind of depth. But the power of it is really, and this is why I'm very ambivalent about what comes next. Rabbi Israeli's essay is enormously powerful in a couple of ways. One is, it is the essay that recognizes the power of autonomy in halakha. He goes to the extreme of saying autonomy extends to suicide, which I'm not sure I would go anywhere near that. I wouldn't go that far, frankly. This essay. It was a famous back and forth with Rosevin, who wrote an essay called Mishpat Shylock, in which he argued that obviously Shakespeare was an anti-Semite, because anybody who knows anything about halakha would know that halakha doesn't permit even Gentiles to allow you to wound them. And therefore, everyone would know that Shylock would never have collected his debt with Antonio, and so he has to be an anti-Semite to suggest that. So Israeli said, no, actually, the Shakespeare's not necessarily anti-Semitic, because halakha recognizes much more value to autonomy than that, to the extent that people under certain circumstances have the right to give up their lives. Right? Whether it's unlimited or not, that's a question beyond our strength. That's a very powerful thing. And in practice, he thinks that the state is bound by international law. And so all discussions of halakha and international law all start from Israeli saying that. And that ends up saying that that there is no basis so far in the laws of war for the raid in Gibeah. Okay, you could try a different approach. You could say, okay, but maybe all the restrictions that you've imposed in war are only true in a milchemet harashut, but not true in milchemet mitzvah. Maybe milchemet mitzvah is a completely different kind of space. Maybe it really is an unethical space. So you have to figure out on what basis you get that. Right? Why would that be so? And you also have to figure out what is the definition of a milchemet mitzvah. So here Rabbi Israeli first says something incredibly wild, and then says something incredibly wilder. We'll have to play out with both of those. So the Gemara, here, I'm going to share screen again because I think it's valuable to see the sources on this. So the Mishnah in Sota famously has the initial position. The Tanakama says that there are two categories called Milchemet Reshut and Milchemet Mitzvah. The difference between being them the extent of the draft. Rabbi says no. The two categories are Milchemet Mitzvah and Milchemet Chuvah. Right? What's a Milchemet Mitzvah? So Rashi on the Tanakama says Milchemet Mitzvah is the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. But he doesn't define what a Milchemet Reshut is. He doesn't tell you that's the only limit. He just says an example of a Milchemet Mitzvah is the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, the Yerushalmi quotes two positions. Rabbi Yochanan's position is that actually everyone agrees that there are only two kinds of war, and the only question is whether we call them Reshut and Mitzvah or Mitzvah and Chuvah. Whereas Rav Chisda says, actually no, the Rabbanan said, what he calls the Rabbanan say, Tanakama say that Mitzvah is Milchemet David and Chuvah is Milchemet Yehoshua. And whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that Mitzvah is when we attack them. Sorry, when we attack them, and Chuvah is when they attack us. Okay, which of these categories do we play out halachically? So the Bavli has the same position that it's just semantic initially, and then it says that Rabbi says that Chuvah, everyone agrees. Really, there are three categories. Chuvah is Yeshua's war of conquest. Milchamet Beit David Lirvacha, everyone agrees that's called Reshut. And the argument is, what happens if you have an argument, what happens if there is a war that is designed to attack the enemy so they don't attack you, preemptive war? One person calls this mitzvah and one person calls this reshut, and the nafkamina is whether if you're forsaken one mitzvah, if you have to stop to go to this war. What seems to be the case is that the fact that we have to give a nafkamina tells you that really everyone agrees that this kind of war, and preemptive war, for the general reshut mitzvah distinction is a milchemet reshut. The only reason it's called a mitzvah, according to one position, which we don't paskin like, is because it has other halachic nafkaminas in terms of osek b'mitzvah pater min mitzvah. But everyone agrees that a preemptive war is a milchemet reshut. Okay, so now the question is, what counts as preemptive? So there are two girsas in the Rambam's Parish and Mishnayos. One of them says it's only if the enemy attacks you on occasion, but they're not attacking you now. One of them says other versions say no, it's if you're in a state of war with them, but there's no current attack. The Rambam in the Mishnah Torah says that gives you a term that's counter to the preemptive war, and he includes in the category of Milchemet Mitzvah Ezrat Yisrael Miyad Tsar Sheba Alehem. Right, so the Rambam says Milchemet Mitzvah includes wars of defense against an enemy who has already come against you, as opposed to preemptive war. Okay, the Meiri seems to suggest in one place that it's not even a Milchemet. It's still considered preemptive as opposed to a Milchemet Mitzvah, even if they are already massed against you and you know they're going to attack you. Okay, now the Israelis writing this in 1954. There was a lot of revisions about this in 1967, and then again the First Lebanon War, when people were struggling to justify Israel taking preemptive action halachically. So part of the problem is that the easy difference between a Milchemet Reshut and Milchemet Mitzvah is that a Milchemet Reshut requires a prior authorization from the Sanhedrin, whereas Milchemet Mitzvah does not. And so some people argued that if you viewed Israeli wars as Milchemet Reshut and not Mitzvah, then they couldn't fight them at all. So there's no Sanhedrin. Rabbi Israeli and others argue, I think, compellingly, no, that's one of the cases where the Sanhedrin just serves as the sovereign representation of the people, and therefore a democratic vote is enough to go out to Milchemet Reshut. even right, you don't actually require a Sanhedrin. But one should be aware that there were positions in this regard. There are positions that preemptive war or any kind of war, when you have an option of not going to war now, is a milchemet reshut, not a milchemet mitzvah, and that would mean that even though that wouldn't prevent you from going to war, but that might mean that, or it would mean certainly, that you can't apply any of the specific rules of milchemet mitzvah to these wars. So then you have a second problem: is what happens if you have a raid that is not from a non-state actor? So are you at war? So Rav Shechter, it was easy for Rabbi Israeli in 1953 to say we're still at war, right? If you think the 1948 war was a milchemet mitzvah, which is a reasonable position, although for another point we can talk about that there were, again, it's very important to distinguish between a milchemet mitzvah and a milchama that is a mitzvah. Right? Just about everybody who was Zionist agreed that the 1948 war was a milchama that was a mitzvah, and everybody should do it. It didn't necessarily mean that the category milchemet mitzvah applied to it. But if whatever kind of war you thought the 1948 war was, it was very reasonable to say in 1953 it was still ongoing. And it was reasonable to say that it was still ongoing against all the Arab nations who to some extent identified themselves as a single mass and were agglomerating politically in various kinds of ways, with Egypt and Syria and Jordan forming various kinds of federations. And there had been no peace treaty with anyone. And everyone knew there was going to be another war soon. It's a little bit more complicated in 2023 to make the same argument when there are peace treaties with nations that were at war with Israel in 1948. And therefore, the application of this argument that we are still at war, which, as Rav Shechter makes it, with whom? And particularly if you're going to apply this in the realm of the Maharal, who says in Ummah, right? That's why the language, right, that Rav Shechter uses of the Arabs is really dangerous and leads you, it has the same kind of error that leads you into inserting Amalek in the English. You have to be clear who you're fighting a war with. So not obvious to me that Rabbi Israeli's argument in 1953 necessarily applies to the contemporary context. If it does, you have to be much narrower. Right? If you're going to claim, the Palestinian people, so you have to say, well, the Palestinian people, except for those who are Israeli citizens, of course, and distinguish, right, if you're worried with Gaza as opposed to Gaza, right? That there's a lot of work needing to be done that has not been done so far. Okay, but the term.
Klapper, can I ask a question? Ummah actually also exists in Islamic law. Is there any actual legal implication of that term in Jewish law?
Ummah?
Ummah in Islamic law means the region that should be governed by Islam.
Well, Ummah doesn't. There's a state for the language for the kind of space that should be governed by Islam. Right? Ummah is the term for the whole Islamic people, I understand.
Well, it's also the region that they should have sovereignty over.
Maybe, okay, whatever. I don't know. I don't know other places. Outside Maharal, I don't know other places where the category has profound halakhic significance.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, that would be my answer. I don't know of other places. I imagine people try, but I don't. When would it have come up? I don't think so. I think we're much more likely to have political definitions, right? And then figure out like what's the boundary of political sovereignty, what's the boundary of the sovereignty of a particular area, of a particular government. I think that's more our issue than ethnicity, which mostly we say all the ethnic categories went away, after the Sanhedrin. So ethnicity is not really a relevant category anymore. Okay, so at the end of the day, though, Rabbi Israeli, having said that you can't do this in milchemet reshut, right? The restrictions, because in milchemet reshut you can only kill people who agreed to be killed, and that really won't work for children, right? So you can't do it that way either. So you think we came out of this and say there's no justification for the war in Kivia, for the raid on Kivia. But instead, what he does is he invents a whole new category. And he claimed there's a category called the Milchemes Nekama, which he derives from Milchemes Midyan. Right? He says, right here, Vanira, Shemasha Kasav in Kvar Bo Akum L'Chuli Al Mitzvah. The Gemara says that if the Gentiles already attacked, everybody agrees that's the Mechem Mitzvah. Einzu Mitzvah Mitzvah HaShevoto. That's not the mitzvah of saving lives. Kizeh Met Eno Chayev Zakein Atzmo. He says you can't claim there's a Mechem Mitzvah in the Rambam just to save lives because you never have an obligation to risk your life to save somebody else. Ela Shemitzvah Himedin Nekama. So he thinks that the Rambam's new category of Mizrat Yisrael Miyad Tsar is not a war of defense, but a war of revenge. And this he thinks is derived from Midian. Right? V'ayne zeh b'tuish l'Rambam Mizrat Yisrael Miyad Tsar. V'ayne al mishkala katuv tzaror temidyanim v'kitem otam ki tzarim lahem lachem. And then the word Midian. So right, you were allowed to kill children. So if we take the words Midian as the overall category, you end up saying that the raid and kivya is justified. Okay, right, and then he says that it seems to him that applies even if they attacked in the past and have now gone back, then that would still be right. That would still be the case. And you can even apply it to children in that case in a war of revenge. All right, that's his last line. V'yotzei mikol zeh sheyesh makom lefulot tigmol b'nakam neged tzarei Yisrael u'pula zot hi begerer milchemet mitzvah. V'chol ason u'pega shekarei leforim levalei britam li'aldehem heim sharavim lazeh v'heim avonam yisau v'ein shum chuva limanam mipulot gmul machmat chashash yifgeu b'zeh chafim mepesha. However, he says, so here is the problem: is the chet midyan, you can target children, and he doesn't want to do that. He thinks that must be wrong. So he says, you know what? Midyan applies as a partial precedent, but not as a full precedent. Midyan was a case where we were getting revenge on them for avodah zarah and gilui arayos. And maybe when you're getting revenge for causing us to do avodah zarah and gilui arayos, it's not clear how much he cares about that in this context, then you can kill even the children. When you're only getting revenge on them for killing you, then you don't have to care about children as much, right? Right? If it's in the context of military necessity, but you're not allowed to target them directly. So this is right. So this is just an incredible thing, right? This is just an incredible move, right? Here we say, right? It says we've never found anywhere else tektanim and shival kain lo matzina b'shum makom berambam v'af v'lo b'dinei malchus v'dinei noach she'anishu gam aktanim. We've never found this. L'fiza ein lilmod mibidyan din zeh shel harigat hataf mitkavein. You can't learn the rule of killing children deliberately from Midian. Ulam yesod hadin, but we can undo the underlying law shekayemet milchemet nekama, that there exists a category called wars of revenge, and that's a milchemet mitzvah. Okay, so it's an incredible article, and at the end of it, I don't think anyone prior understood the Rambam when he said Israel Miyad Tsar as putting in a category of revenge, as right, and that's what the difference between response and preemption is revenge as opposed to self-defense. And the only source he has for that, which the Gemara never mentions, right, we talked at the very beginning that people use Midian as hashkem habol hargacha hashkem lahargo. No, right? Nobody uses it as a precedent for revenge. So the notion that you can create a new category based it on something that has never been used as a precedent, and then say, but I don't really mean it, because you introduce a whole new, right? Because you say, oh, that's only by avodah zarah, and we're talking about shvichus damim, and the rules are different there. I can't see how you do that. I just can't see how you do that. I'm going to throw in one other point as to why I think you can't do that. That is right, that there's a Gemara in Bava Kama. Gemara Bava Kama says, and it seems like right on point. If the Mechilak Kvoda of Israeli were here, I would I think quote this Gemara directly out of it and see what he said. Bava Kama says that God says to Moshe, Al Tasser as Moav, Al Titkar Bam Milchama. Don't attack Moab. The Gemara says, what? Why would Moshe think of starting a war without God's permission? And the answer is that Moshe made a kal v'chomer. If the Midyanim, who only came to help Moab And the Torah nonetheless says Torah is Midyanim Bikitemotam, right? That's the whole narrative of Parshat Balak, that Midian is coming to help Balak, even though there's no, right? Moab is actually launching the war. Well, so if God told me to attack Midian, Kal V'chomer, I should attack Moab. So God says to him, no, you can't make Kal V'chomers like that, because if you killed Moab, you would kill Ruth. So here you have an explicit source which says, don't derive things from the word Midian. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu thought he could derive things from the word Midian, and God tells him, no, you can't. So in light of that, Rabbi Israeli is saying, yeah, but I can. All right, the word Midian becomes a precedent. That is utterly astonishing to me. So end of the day, all right, here's where I think we are. There are a number of sources you can use that legitimate war in some form or fashion, and war is not medieval tournament where only combatants are ever in danger, and therefore allowing war entails necessarily some degree of risk to either non-combatants or non-enemy combatants, or people who don't even or aren't even supporters, things like that. I'm willing to grant that. The question is whether Halakhic can provide any form of guidance in that, or Judaism can provide any form of guidance as to how we restrict that. I'm very encouraged that everybody who cites a source which finds a way to impose some form of morality external to just legitimating war on that source, whether it's Rosh Hafter or Rav Weiss or even Rav Israeli. Although in the end, Rav Israeli, even at the end, right, when he says you can't target children, right, he's imposing something that isn't actually found in the source. And none of that gives us any help as to figuring out what sort of boundaries we're going to set up. There are hints as with things that might help. Rabbi Israeli suggests that it has to be grounded in some form of autonomous agreement to be part of the war. Right, that's interesting. Right, that's an interesting notion, and maybe that means you have to follow international law. But I think that's a problematic consequence. You have various ways of. You have the notion of rodef shechol hasil bechad me'evarav, and you could conceivably impose that not on the individual level, but at every level, and say that at all levels, if you're going to have a war, you have to plan the war in such a way which causes the least death possible to the other side. And then that raises the question: well, how do you balance your injuries on your side with injuries to the other side? And that's where you could start building halakha, which we have not built at all so far. You can try and build it out ethically from from David HaMelech, and and try and figure out under what parameters do we think David HaMelech would be or would not be prevented from building the Beit HaMikdash. And you can start building a literature out around that as well. It's not enough to say anything, I think, rigorous, where anybody could say, well, halachically, it's permitted to do this and usher to do that. It's enough to say that I think that the position that Rabbi Broid initially took, that that there's no rules at all, can't be true either. There are intermediate positions which are which require thought, like Rav Yuval Sherlow, who suggested that ethics apply up to the point where you would lose. But ethics never require you to lose the war. I think we might want to qualify that, by talking about, well, what wars are what sort of wars are you allowed to enter? What are the wars that you can't afford to lose? Right, the wars that you can't afford to lose. I think there's much more room for complication in that area. I published the Chazon Ish, who talks about what happens if there's a war that you shouldn't have started, but now you're losing. What are the consequences of those? I think there's a lot of room to do it. I think there's a lot of work to do. I think it's interesting that every modern figure I can find, with the exception perhaps of Rabbi Broid, thinks that there are rules, and the rules are something like you can only kill people that are when it's who aren't directly involved in combat, when it is a military necessity, and that it makes a difference how guilty they are. or how involved they are. I think that gives you a framework for an ethical for constructing an ethical or halakhic rules of war. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet at all, would be my take. But I think we're there enough that when people say the other way around, I'd say, for example, like one cheerful thing is that no one in the serious halakhic literature says either that this is Amalek or that this is the war to conquer Eretz Yisrael. And it's Mechal Mitzvah. It's Mechal Mitzvah because of that. Okay, right. So Strauss asks correctly, what about isn't Midyan the source for law that you have to have a fourth way out? And that's great, right? That's another. Thank you. I should have put out that everyone agrees that almost everyone agrees that the law of that you have to allow a way out of a siege comes from Melchemet Midyan and only applies to Melchemet Reshut. And therefore, it seems that the Gemara seems to be clearly treating Melchemet Midyan as under the framework of Melchemet Reshut, not Melchemet Mitzvah, which doesn't work according to Rabbi Israeli either. I think it's best to treat Melchemet Mitzvah. But the interesting thing is that the Gemara there derives it Misvara also, so it's right. It's also a very interesting notion. I didn't mention the fourth way out, out of the siege, because as I've written, I think it's obvious that can't possibly apply to wars where you're trying to capture or kill people. Those are right, obviously only applies where you're trying to capture territory. Then it makes sense to let the other people escape, even if it means they'll attack you later. But now you have the fortification. But to say that you're trying to kill people, but you have to let them escape, this is right. This just ends you in a silly, endless loop. That can't possibly be the case, right? But the question is it really a war if it's against people? Maybe we define war, right, as being about territory, except in the context of Amalek, right? That those are all also possible. I think there's a lot of work needed to do. I hope to explore the next few weeks. I just don't know that it can be done now. The notion that I think many of the early Zionist poskim took, that actually we would view some of the wars in Israel as Melchemet Reshut, but a really, really good Melchemet Reshut that fulfilled the mitzvah, but not a technical Melchemet mitzvah. I think that is something interesting to talk about. It doesn't work rhetorically now because it's very hard. So I've talked to some people about that. There's a conversation between Rav Yitzchak Herzog and Rav Meshulam Roth in 1947, in which I think it's 1947, which Rav Herzog tells Rabbi Roth, I need you to sign on to this document I'm putting out, which tells everybody they have to come out afilu kala mechubata because of Melchemet Mitzvah. And Rabbi Roth says, I think the Melchama is a mitzvah, but I can't sign your thing. What you should tell them is that it's a really, really important religious thing that then everybody should volunteer. Right? So that's a really interesting and powerful thing if we want in 1947. And it might be that one could shift to rhetoric like that. That would make one less susceptible to the kind of issues that come up, like the slipping Amalek into the English translation of Rav Schechter's article, or the people who want to try and connect this to Melchemet Shiva Amim, which has come up lately. I think you can see is that in the Halakhic discourse that doesn't happen. Halakhic discourse on this right says this is war, right? But it's not a war that should leave its strategic purpose. And I think that's an important thing to know. And I think it's important to see that the Halakhic discourse agrees that that war is not in an ethical zone. But beyond that, I think we're still in the realm where we have some degree of ethics, but we don't really have halacha at all. There have been there are IDF codes of behavior which have been affected by people who know halacha, but that's not the same as saying that they're halacha. There are more detailed analyses of specific issues which I have not brought in, and which can be compiled. I imagine that I saw that Shlomo Brody just has a new book out called Ethics of Our Fighters. So I imagine that many of those issues are addressed there. I know that Rav Tabori put out an article which goes through some of these cases historically recently. So the literature may be beginning to develop. not my strength to go through lots and lots of secondary literature and assemble it. So I haven't done that, but I hope I gave you a reasonable tour of the primary sources, and I hope a basis for creating a framework as to which sorts of statements are reasonable and which sorts of statements are not. And recognizing that there are things that you have to just say, like, yes, somebody said that, but that can't be. Okay. I'll take, this is long, and I thank everyone for staying with me. If people want to stay and ask questions, I'll stay as well, or you're always welcome to email me. Yes, Jerry.
So what's the point of this whole exercise if at the end you can say, well, that just can't be because it's not ethical, or that can be because it is ethical? Why bother?
Yes, that's always a great question. Generally, the answer, I think that there's pressure. I think if it were, if somebody came up with a like, for me, let's say Israeli had a really compelling argument, right? Then I would take a lot more for me to say that, and other people, right? And if it was, if there was a lot of agreement in it, but I would say, look, he was a great man, and it's a great article other than that. But here, like, he came up with something which is against multiple sources, which has no precedent, and is ethically impossible. Right? I'm okay saying that. In the case of Rav Schechter and Rav Weiss, I'm not the one who said that. They're the one who said that. That's it, right? That's really interesting to me. Right? So what I can say is that nobody in the Halakhic system quotes the Maharal and doesn't think there are implicit ethical constraints. Right? But I don't think I'm saying, look, there are all these great Halakhic arguments I'm going to reject. The answer is there really are no Halakhic arguments. And it's really interesting that all the sources that could be important to Halakha without ethics, people impose ethics on. Even Rabbi Israeli, even when he's making up this inventing this whole new category, still says you can't target children. Right? That's really interesting to me. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, thank you all. I guess you should tell me in the next couple of hours whether you think I should or should not post this. And my inclination is yes. I think that that nothing was said that shouldn't be said. But I'm open to people arguing the other way. And I hope you'll stay tuned for further Shiur. It was great learning with you. Thank you for all the questions as well. Okay.